Welcome everyone who is with us at this moment to our very first AMA this year. And it's a very exciting year for Minima because we are preparing for our mainnet launch. And today I've got the honor of hosting on stage our CTO and the mastermind behind the protocol, Paddy, who we also know as Spartacus Rex here. Just a few words on logistics before we kick it off. If you have trouble hearing any one of us, just click on the icon and you can adjust the volume for individual speakers. And questions you have, please put them into the stage questions channel and we will pick them up as we go. A quick note, because we have Paddy here, who is really the tech mastermind, we'd like to focus on the protocol and all Minima related rabbit hole questions. And if you have any commercial or marketing partnership related questions, feel free to put them in stage questions as well, because we have Ryan from the community and our CMO, John, who will address those directly there. And without further ado, let's get started. So yeah, Paddy, for those that are maybe new to Minima and haven't heard of you yet, could you quickly share what got you on this journey to create Minima and what was the fact that sparked the idea?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you all for coming. I'll try and be quick. I'm quite a chatter. So off we go. Let's start from the beginning. So what was happening before Bitcoin? And what we were trying to do was we were trying to come up with a system that was resistant to censorship. By which I mean we were trying to come up with a system that it was not possible for somebody to tamper or alter or restrict or censor users from doing what the system was designed to do. And we knew that the only known way that we were going to be able to do this was through decentralization. And the reason you need decentralization is as soon as a system is centralized, it's easy to censor, it's easy to turn it off. That centralization, that central point becomes the attack vector. So you have to come up with a system that is decentralized. And we couldn't get that to work. Whatever we did, however we tried to sort it out, it always ended up having some central server, some central body where all the different disparate, thousands of users would send their information to them, to this center. And that would somehow go, okay, well, I got this first and then this. And that would break the system because a system is only as decentralized as its most centralized bit. And so if there is a central server, that is where the attack takes place. And so this was the problem that we couldn't fix. And then Satoshi comes along and he says, well, actually, I've got this idea that uses POW, that uses proof of work, something that Adam Back had used, brilliantly in his Hashcash protocol. Yeah, Hashcash by Adam Back was a system where when you sent emails, what he said was, well, look, why don't you do a little bit of work, when you send this email? And that way spammers can't send millions of emails because they have to do millions of pieces of work. And so Satoshi took this system of proof of work and he said, you know what, if we add this to another brilliant invention, which was the blockchain, we can actually come up with a system which is decentralized because all the different disparate users across the network independently and objectively do some work when they say, look, this is what I think has happened. This is what's happened in the last few minutes. And I do some work, to back that up. And then I send that across the network. And then we don't need to send it to a central server. And everybody can just get these messages and everybody independently can say, oh, okay, this is the longest chain. This is the longest, blockchain. And so this is what happened. And this was the brilliance. He came up with a way for us to have a decentralized system of communication, which allowed us all to come to consensus. And this is what was lacking before Satoshi came along. So this was incredible, and he pointed it at money, and he said, "Look, this is how we're going to do a monetary system." He wanted to fix the horrible situation we're currently in financially, and he came up with Bitcoin. And when you first saw it, and when it first dawned on you exactly what was happening, it was it was mind blowing. It captured you. It made you drop everything that you were doing, and you expended all of your energy in this fantastical project. And so that's what happened to me. And I fell down the Bitcoin rabbit hole about 2012. And, we were all running the software and we were all doing it. And it was like, wow, this actually works. This is actually a decentralized system. We're doing our work. We're running this blockchain. Um, and this might actually, do what it says on the tin. And then a little bit later, what started to happen was that centralization started to creep in. And centralization is, a very pernicious and a very powerful force. And it is not the case that you can have centralization and then say, well, look, we'll stop it when it gets too much. That's not how centralization works. Centralization keeps going until it's eaten everything in the room. And so during the, big block wars was really when, the cracks in my, beautiful relationship with Bitcoin started to show, when I suddenly realized that I was no longer an equal on the network, helping to come up with the consensus, and that I had become a bit player, that I had become a twig, being pushed along on this river of the miners. And so what you have to realize is that when you design a system, it is either a decentralized system or it isn't. I'm not one that believes in this sort of scale of decentralization. And so what was happening was clear as day, the miners had become the ones who run the network. And not only had they become the ones who run the network, there was clearly a force there making them compete against each other, which is what the miners do. They play this competition with each other to see who finds the blocks for money.
Yeah.
And we have seen this throughout all the other industries on the planet. When you're mining gold, when you're mining oil, what happens 50 years down the road? You get three miners. Yeah, you get one miner. This is an industry now, and economies of scale. Bitcoin doesn't break that economic tenant. Economies of scale tell us that there's only one way that this game ends. And during the block size wars was really the time that I realized this is what's happening with Bitcoin. So
Okay,
we
so sorry if I interrupt. So just to
Sorry.
put it shortly for people, it's basically you
Right.
realized that centralization was happening
Yes.
and you wanted to do something about it. And that's how Minima was born, because you
Yes.
saw all the shortcomings in the existing Bitcoin system, which
The one
is
shortcoming. There's
unfortunate.
so much brilliance in Bitcoin. Sorry,
Yeah,
I'm
there
not
is.
here to berate Bitcoin. It's just that one element of it was, the niggly bit. It's like,
Yeah,
we can't have that. We can't
the
have this competition at the base of Bitcoin running the consensus.
yeah, so it is the competition part and the monetary incentives.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, and that is how Minima was born. And because you were speaking about, yeah, let's see what happens in 50 years, what would you say is your vision with Minima? What would you think people in 10 years are going to say about us in,
Well,
let's say,
No, no, absolutely. So, whereas I can see where every single other chain out there is going, the larger these chains get, the more centralized they get. Yeah, that's just, when Vitalik sits there and says that it's going to take me 85 terabytes a year to run an Ethereum node, I know I'm not going to be able to run a node. And I'm frankly about as hardcore a techie as you get. So 10 years from now, all of these chains are going to be completely centralized with a few runners who actually decide what's going on. And it's not enough to be a validator. This is the crucial point that people seem to be lacking. That validating the transactions is obviously very important because it means that you can't change the rules. But censorship is not a rule change. Excluding a transaction from a block does not break any of the tenets of your blockchain. And the only people who are involved in that are those who are building the blocks. So whereas on these other chains, you've got less and less miners building the chains, less and less pools with more and more hash power, competition, the result is in the title. There's a winner eventually. That's how it's going to go.
Mhm.
Whereas on Minima, what we've done is we've switched the competitive element that runs the chain for a cooperative element. And what that means is that we all work together. And so currently, Minima has about 13,000 nodes running. And I'm just going to use the term node as a full node. It's a fully validating, fully constructing node. There's 13,000 people on the network building the blockchain. And the larger Minima gets, the more decentralized it gets. It is the inverse of what we see happening on all the other chains. And frankly, 13,000 nodes, I mean, quickly looking, what I would say is that Minima currently, in terms of its decentralization of the consensus that runs the chain, is larger than the sum of maybe the bottom 99% of the chains out there. That's a big claim, but that's currently 13,000 nodes. I mean, clearly, we're probably more than any other chain other than Bitcoin. Yeah. But the point about Minima is not that we are going to be, more than the sum of the Bitcoin nodes. The point about Minima is that we are going to be using more constructive nodes than the sum of every other chain out there. And I'm going to go further and say that not only are we going to be more than the sum of all the other nodes out there, we are going to be orders of magnitude more than the sum of all the other chains out there. Yeah, the bigger Minima gets, the more decentralized it gets, the harder it becomes for you to influence which transactions get into blocks, because every single user is out there trying to put transactions into blocks.
Okay,
And so I
so
guess,
to yeah, sorry.
sorry.
To clarify,
Yeah, sorry, sorry.
to go back to the question. So let's say in 10 years, do you think we
Yes,
are like at this level of decentralization that basically Minima is the base layer for
yes.
most of
So,
the things?
yes, sorry. So what I see in 10 years' time, where we have to get to. Now, Minima has made trade-offs to do what it does. It is not the case that you can just do everything and take all the best bits of, all the other chains and expect people to run this on their phones. No. So, we have had to make trade-offs. The Minima protocol is incredibly lean. It's incredibly, you know, clean. And so what Minima requires is lots of users. Yeah, we are the ones who are protecting the chain, so it requires, frankly, millions of us to do this. And in 10 years' time, for Minima to work, then we need to be using a noticeable percentage of the world's power to protect the chain. Now, let's say Minima gets on every phone on the planet. Okay, that's the start. That's the first course mainly. Yeah. Then we get all the IoT devices, all your fridges, so that your fridge, when it wants to, pay for the food from the supermarket that it gets sent to it, it runs a Minima node. It takes no memory, so why not just whack it in with a chip? And so eventually, 10 years from now, what I hope will happen is that we will have a Minima chip that is installed in every electronic device, which will give you access to the backbone financial network of the planet, and that all of us together will be using somewhere in the region of 0.1% to 1% of the world's power. Because as soon as that happens, every other attack becomes cheaper than attacking the chain, and then Minima works. Then there's no point trying to reverse or reorg a power blockchain by somehow diverting 0.1% of the world's power to some ASIC farm somewhere, which won't exist because there is no capital investment in minimum mining since there is no return on your capital. So that is never going to happen. So as soon as we become big enough that it just becomes not worth their while attacking the chain, when frankly they can just, I mean, not to be violent about this and raw, but there are other ways of getting people to give you their money without having to reorg a blockchain. They can come up to me and put a gun to my head and say, "Just give me the money," and I'll give it to them.
Yeah, I
And so
mean, for the average person, so would you say that maybe people use Minima without realizing in 10 years? Because if it's in my fridge, I don't understand how my smart fridge works.
absolutely, absolutely. No one will actually know that they're running on top. They will realize that, people know, hey, we use, the minimum backbone network for our finance.
Yeah.
But all the technicalities of it will disappear, just as all the technicalities of using Facebook and all the websites that you're using today have disappeared from the UDP packet protocol that is being sending all the messages in TCP/IP and HTTP. You won't know any of those words. Minima will just be seamlessly transparent, running in the background, and everyone will just be using it.
Okay, that sounds like a future to look forward to.
It does.
And one of the buzzwords that gets thrown around quite a lot these days is Web3. And recently, a post by Moxie, the founder of Signal, made the rounds on crypto Twitter. And he was writing about his impressions on Web3. And for those that haven't read it, one of the main points of his argument that we won't get a fully decentralized web ever is that people won't run their own servers. What was your first impression when you read that post or your first thought in?
I thought that everything he wrote applied perfectly to what I see out there in the current sort of Ethereum NFT, current web space. So I can understand why he's saying that, but there is a solution.
Yeah.
And the truth is that, phones really have only been around for like, hard phones, the phones we use today, about 10 years. And my phone now is as powerful as my laptop was, 5 years ago. And they are only getting more and more powerful. So as far as, the future goes, this is our terminus. This is our terminal into the digital space. Your phone is easily capable of doing what a web server was doing 10 years ago. And so as we progress into the future, what we really need is some way of, you know, of information transfer over a phone-based network where users will be running servers on their phones. Yeah, so it is perfectly possible in the future for everybody to be running their own website on their phone, for people to be able to communicate directly. When they invented the internet, they didn't think about encryption and cryptography and security and SSL and all of that stuff. We were all, they were all so happy about being able to send hello over the command line to each other, which is where it actually started. That they didn't think, well, they couldn't possibly foresee all the implications of what that information transfer would be. But with the benefit of hindsight, with the benefit of the cryptography that we now have available to us with public and private keys and encryption and decryption and signatures and verification, you can envisage, and I can see a future where we will be able to transact over an information transfer layer in the future, running the services that we require on our phones without anybody being able to interject or stop or censor what it is that we're doing. And going further on this Web3 thing, because it's a very nebulous sort of topic and nobody really knows what it means. They're sort of, what does it mean, this Web3? And I
Yeah,
guess
I
it
think
means,
it's
sorry.
too new for anybody to have a definition yet, and everybody thinks about something else. Some
Yeah,
people might think it's like they're moving around in the 3D world. Some think
yeah.
it's
What I
something
would
different.
say though, at a fundamental level, is it's Bitcoin, yeah, but for information. So what Bitcoin has done is it has shown us that we can have this world where we can be, we can send value in a censorship resistant way. Mining centralization aside, nobody, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the concepts that Bitcoin has opened the world to. The world is fundamentally different now. People understand that there are, you know, that there are forces out there at play that are incentivized to look after themselves. This is the nature of the beast. This is game theory. There's nothing wrong with that. And that you have to be smart. You have to be clever about this if you want to have a system that is free, a system that enables you to have freedom of value. And so, what I think of when I think of Web3 is I take Bitcoin, which is for value, and I want the same thing for information so that anybody can send any information they want to anybody else in a censorship resistant way. And once you have that, everything else can be built on top of it. But at the base level, that is what I think of when I see Web3.
Okay, so do you think, basically, I think Moxie is saying that it's just too difficult for people to run a server. So the solution for that is that everybody can easily run a server at the click of a button.
Well, as a minimum proponent, I would say most people would not believe that it is possible to run an entire blockchain on your phone. And yet Minima shows that that is possible. And if you can run a blockchain, I mean, when people think of blockchains, they think 500 gigabytes, they think of massive ASIC web farms, server farms. They think of Ethereum growing at 85 terabytes a year. No wonder he thinks it's not possible for someone to run an HTTP server on their phone. But frankly, that's nothing in comparison to what Minima has to do on your phone to get a blockchain running. So as I said, no, you can't do it in the old way. Yes, we have to be smarter about this, but is it possible? Absolutely. Can I run web servers and Facebook sites and social networks and chat applications, with peer to peer between myself and other users? No problem. Absolutely. And we see that playing out in our tech labs because, currently, for those of you that have read the white paper, we have Minima, which is the value transfer layer, but we also have something called Maxima, which is the information transfer layer. And it sort of struck me as, you know, pretty obvious, frankly, when I was writing the Minima paper that you're going to need value and you're going to need information. Yeah, you need those two things. And if you have a network of censorship resistant value and information transfer, then you have all the tools required, everything you need to do anything you want. Um, and so we actually have a very beta version of Maxima running between me and all the other techie nerds that I work with, and we will be releasing that for the general public in the coming weeks. And that's really exciting because once you start realizing, that you can have the functionality of WhatsApp, but running peer to peer over a backbone censorship resistant network, it sort of gets your heart racing. You sort of realize, God, this is really something different to what I'm used to. It's a very subtle change, but with large ramifications for what will be possible in the future. And I've witnessed it, and I've seen it, and I know it's possible. And as I've said, don't tell me that an HTTP server is more complicated than a Minima server. And if I can run Minima on your phone, then I can run a web server.
Yeah. Okay. Moving on to a few of the questions we've got from the community in advance. And I think it's also one of the questions I get asked when I tell people that are not in blockchain about fitting an entire node on your phone. Like the first question is always like, can my funds and my node be stolen if somebody gains access to my device? Maybe playing that tape further. What happens if I break my device?
Personal responsibility, ladies and
Yeah.
gentlemen. This is the point about freedom. This is something that people need to understand. It is completely up to you how much, how in charge of your own funds you are. Now, it is possible for you to have your money on your phone and for you to not have typed in the password so that even if somebody pinched your phone, they couldn't access the funds. But when you want to spend your funds, yes, the private key, the thing that gives you access to the coins on the minimum net will have to be entered in somewhere. And so this is a scale. How much do you want to be in charge of your coins? Who can you trust with your money? So personally, I memorize my private keys and I don't have them written down anywhere. And so there's no way that you could get them off me. They're not on my phone. They're not on my computer. They're not anywhere. And only when I want to access them do I access, like, when I want to access my crypto, I do it on a separate device that I don't have connected to the internet where I sign the transactions and I send it. I agree. What a nightmare. There's a lot going on there. But the other solution is that, yeah, I have it on my computer and maybe you only put a little bit on your computer. There's going to have to be an understanding that, you can either be in charge of these things or not. You can either ask someone to look after your private keys or not. And that's really the point. I don't think of this as a technical question. I really think of this more as a discussion about how much power are you prepared to take on board yourself? How much responsibility do you want? The truth is that 99% of people will never be hacked or lose their funds or have horrible things happen to them. But if you want to have the 100% assurance that, okay, I'm in charge of my keys and no one can ever run off with them, then that comes with its own, with its own weight, with its own ramifications.
Yeah.
So yes, it is possible for you to have your coins on your phone, and even if your phone gets stolen, that they won't get pinched. But there are going to be other things that you need to do for that to work. And then, convenience. How convenient do you want it to be? Coinbase is a very convenient application. I don't use Coinbase. Yeah, but for my mother, do I want her to have to worry about the private keys when she can't even use a mouse correctly? Not really. Is she in danger of losing her funds by using Coinbase? No. If Coinbase was to go down, I think the ramifications for that would be so enormous that everybody would have to sort of rethink the world, and their worldview. So different people will have different requirements and different options open to them.
Yeah, so it comes down to personal risk management at the end of the day. I
Yes,
think most
exactly.
people will probably, if they're really into crypto, they will probably have a hardware wallet. And I think similar things would apply to Minima in their case. And those that
Everything that
just want,
applies, yes, sorry, because everything that applies to the other chains applies to us. That's what I mean. This is a problem we all face in the crypto space. How am I going to save these private keys? Where are they going to be? What if I lose my dongle? Yeah, and it's like, well, have you written it down on a piece of paper somewhere? And it's like, what if your house gets burgled and then they pinch the piece of paper? Have you buried it in the garden? All these discussions. People are saying, can I link it to my DNA? These biometric devices. And actually, when you look into that, it's very hard to get an exact private key from your blood. without any discrepancies at all because your DNA changes. So I think in future there will be better solutions, but right now it's something that we all have to, everybody in the crypto space is trying to come up with, better and better solutions. But as always, as you have said, it comes to personal risk management.
Yeah, and it might just be that you share parts of your private key with your family,
Yeah,
and
you know,
only when they're all together you can retrieve the whole thing, um,
absolutely.
depending on how much you like your family. Um, Another question was, is it possible to predict when we can expect smart contracts on Minima?
Minima has smart contracts already, so you
Yeah.
can write smart contracts. I mean, the 098 version, which was the version we were running last year, was a complete and full version of Minima, and we actually had little mini dApps for writing, the contracts, and in this current version, we've been working on the peer-to-peer networking, and we've been working on the optimization of the efficiency of the protocol, which I have to say happily, I think we've done great steps in that. It's running, really sweetly and smoothly on my phone. On the current network, we've had no critical failures. There've been no chain splits, which used to happen quite a bit on the old version. It's really a completely different animal. The Minima scripting language is basically finished. I'd say 99%. We have some interesting discussions in the Minima tech, channel, where certain people, have ideas about what we could or couldn't do. But yeah, you can absolutely write smart contracts. It's not like an Ethereum smart contract. This is more, when you think of the UTXO model, when you think of Minima as well as with Bitcoin, what these protocols do, I think of them as the assembly language, as the chip version of Ethereum and these sort of rather bloated languages that allow you to do everything. And so you know that you can write a program and you know that that program runs on a chip. Well, Minima and Bitcoin are actually the chip, not the program. Yeah, you get inputs, you get outputs. It's a very sort of base layer level language. And anybody out there who has attempted to write assembly knows that it is very hard to write good smart contracts in assembly, to write good code in assembly. But that's the place, because that's the language that the computer speaks. That's where the true power lies. And anything that you can write in a program gets converted to a chip. So anything you could write in any other language can obviously be converted into the chip version, into the UTXO model version. It just requires a slight shift in your programming paradigm and the way that you think about it.
So in practice, if I was a dev, how would I create a Minima smart contract? Do I have to
It's
learn
fun.
some?
Absolutely. So I've got a very short tutorial. So if you run Minima on the command line, you can either do it on your phone, but it's probably easier to do this stuff on your computer. You type tutorial, it'll show you the entire Minima scripting language, which I'd like to say would probably fit on a t-shirt. Yeah. So there's like, what, 20, 25 functions. And you can do run script and you can run your scripts. And we are actually adding the functions now for transaction creation. So what Minima really needs to do is it needs to be a gateway to the Minima network, where any transaction that it is possible to make should be possible to make using the Minima application. In the old 098 version, it absolutely did everything. In this version, I think we're going to have to wait till the end of the month for the rest of the functions. You can run your scripts, but it's still a bit tricky to build the transactions. But that's coming in the next sort of month, actually.
All right, that sounds great. We shall all look forward to that. I have another good question from Joshua, who is asking about the direct messaging. So, with our last hard fork, we enabled a peer-to-peer network, and he asks if it wouldn't be useful to enable peer-to-peer direct messaging, not only with your direct peers, but with everyone you'd like to connect to, using something like a unique identifier.
Absolutely. And not to get everybody too excited too soon, but we have an application in the R&D labs at the moment called Max Chat, which is our version of WhatsApp that runs exactly as Joshua would like. Good old Joshua, he's a good techie, that runs over the peer-to-peer network of Minima. And so, yes, obviously it would be, it's wonderful to be able to send messages to users over a peer-to-peer network, and we are working on that. And that is really what Maxima does. That is what our intention for Maxima is, that it gives you this information transport layer built on top of the Minima transport layer. But I'm going to have to warn you here. The reason the current infrastructure of the internet has become what it has is because everybody's used to everything being free. Everybody is, because you're not paying when you use any of these websites, you are the product. Yeah, they are mining you, they're data mining you, so they can show you all those horrible adverts for all the things you don't want. And so the truth is that if you want a censorship resistant information transfer layer, you're going to have to be able to, you know, effort, energy, value. You're going to have to pay for these things. Now, what you're going to have to pay is frankly going to be insignificant. It's going to be a very small amount. But it is the intention of Maxima to offer you exactly that, a peer-to-peer information transfer layer where you will be able to send a message encrypted, signed, etc., to any other user on the Minima network, frankly, instantly, given our tests at the moment. And yeah, that is definitely functionality that is coming down the road.
And I think it's also people waking up to the fact that they are the product these days. I mean, if you just follow the news closely, there's a lot of occurrences, and there are now a lot of companies as well that provide search engines where you can pay them so they don't track you.
I mean,
Um,
it's funny. I completely agree. And over the last 10 years, something has shifted. And I think this is, just humanity as we grow up with this technology. The internet, frankly, is still only 40, 50 years old. Give it another couple of hundred years, and we'll have a much better idea about, what's going on. And so I totally agree. People would not even know what censorship was, frankly. And now, because of the efforts of sites like Twitter, we all know what censorship is. And because we know when we have a conversation in WhatsApp about the latest virtual reality goggles, and then we go to Amazon and suddenly I'm bombarded with adverts for virtual reality goggles, that somebody is sniffing conversation, somebody is listening in on that. They would say, no human looked at the conversation, but their bots are looking at it. Yeah, they're scraping that information so that they can target you with whatever it is that they want to try and sell you. So this has sort of really come to a head recently, as you said. And I think in general, there's been an awakening to this idea that maybe privacy is something that people want. Maybe freedom to communicate and to send value wherever I want shouldn't be under the remit of government to decide whether or not you could do that. And this has definitely become a very hot topic lately. I agree.
yeah, definitely. It's also about, yeah, privacy is not just about them not listening, it's about you deciding what you
Yeah,
actually want to share. Um,
absolutely.
So, since we're already at the topic of Maxima as well, Bera Bull asked on Discord, what is the ratio of Maxima to Minima nodes going to be? And what exact roles are Maxima nodes going to play?
So I consider this a networking as opposed to a blockchain issue. The thing is that when you use your phone currently, you don't get an external IP. Yeah, your phone is connected to whatever server it is that you're connected to on the running. So there needs to be ways for you to route information from one phone to another. Now, what you want is an information transfer layer that is incentive compatible. What I mean by that is that this isn't something that needs to be done. This isn't something that you need to get on your knees and beg people to do. This isn't something that is just going to happen through altruism. Yeah, we need a good game theoretic incentive for these maximum nodes to be running. Currently, I'm quite shocked at the number of maximum nodes that we have, as in it's massive. It's like it's almost half the network. Just as many as the phone nodes. I mean, clearly, you get a very strong connection to the internet when you're running at the server version of Minima, and clearly you are a full, complete, member. But where I see Minima in the future, frankly, because of its ability to not have any central requirements, Minima is perfect for a mesh network. Yeah, Minima would work really, really well if we were just running it over radio transmitters and we just had pylons and we were just transmitting the information. And then you wouldn't need to worry about this. So, frankly, what Maxima is trying to do at the moment is get around the limitations of the networking that our phone gives us. But in the future, I see that as dissipating and disappearing. and you actually being given a proper connection to the internet from your phone, and then everybody would run one. You won't actually have to be routed through anybody because you yourself will be contactable. So currently, I see Maxima as that, as a way to mitigate the limitations that our current networking ability is. And as far as how many Maxima nodes we have to Minima nodes, you need about 1% for it to work. We've got about 50% at the moment, but I'm absolutely sure at some point, maybe when we start hitting Africa, India, those countries in a larger fashion, that number will sway towards the 1%. But currently, massive numbers of Maxima nodes, way more than we need, frankly.
Yeah. Okay. So another question he had was that, let's say I have a Maxima node. How are fees determined if users send large files through my node?
Free market. Free market, of course. That's the only way that this can be determined. And so people will set what they want for their data transfers, and people will pay that or they won't pay that. I mean, the truth is that the effort involved in routing this data is so small. We've got tests running, we've got servers running, we're routing data through all of that. That a certain amount of free data would be no problem at all. Clearly, if you want to be downloading movies via Maxflix, which is a video streaming service in the future running over Maxima, you may have to be involved in some sort of financial transaction. But it's really a very, very small amount of effort that's required from the node itself. So I would say it's going to be very low, and I will say that number is going to be determined by a free market.
Yeah. Do you envision there's going to be a marketplace, or do people have to sign up once they start running a Maxima node, or is it just going to be somewhat automated so you will automatically be connected to the closest node or
It
the lowest
all
latency?
needs to be automated. Clearly, all of this stuff has to be transparent and seamless to the user, and there are algorithms that allow us to do that. And yeah, you won't even know that it's happening. Luckily, because the information is encrypted and signed by you on the client, there isn't actually anything that anybody in the middle of the transaction can do. This information transfer. And as I said, the Maxima network is incentive compatible. It works because there is a decent incentive for people to run it. So yeah.
Okay. And another question, and it is about IPFS. For those who are not familiar, IPFS is short for Interplanetary File System, and it is a well distributed file storage system. It's not blockchain, even though a lot of people confuse it with that, but anybody can basically run it and then store other people's files on it. But Minima doesn't use IPFS. What is our equivalent of it, and are there any similarities, if at all?
Yeah, I mean, I love IPFS as a concept. I think this idea of having a global store of data. I think Ethereum, we're going to call it Swarm or something. I can't remember. But yeah, having this global shared data store. Free Web used to do it, 10 years ago, 20 years ago. And I love it as a concept. I'm not sure whether IPFS is incentive compatible, though, if I'm completely honest. By which I mean the idea of it being completely free, the idea of people doing it altruistically sort of rubs me the wrong way when I think of the game theory of it. Minima can absolutely use IPFS if you wanted to, and in fact, we're going to be, we were going to have a store that directly stored your files on IPFS at some point, but again, I think there needs to be that financial incentive. I think there needs to be that value transfer layer integrated into IPFS for it to really take off. For you to be able to store, serious amounts of data. It's not going to work as a sort of hope that it's going to be able to store what I send to it, which is frankly what you do at the moment. Yeah, there's no guarantee that your data is stored on there because only those who run it decide, well, this is the most common stuff that is used, and so we'll keep a copy of it. So love it as a concept, but I think it needs some tweaking on the incentive side for it to really go global and interplanetary.
Yeah, so I think one of the reasons for somebody to run IPFS would probably be because they bought an NFT. At least that's my personal motivation. And so NFTs have been quite a big topic recently, and I think a lot of people are waking up to the fact that you don't necessarily store the image in your NFT, it's just a link to the image. And if that is stored in the IPFS, we've seen that even artworks from Steve Aoki weren't available at times. How's that going to work on Minima?
Yes. So again, NFTs. What a fantastic space that is. As always, these things from a permissionless environment that the crypto scene is. Yeah, this is what we can take our hats off to Ethereum for basically bootstrapping all of this. It's raw at the moment. It's rough at the moment. It's in its infancy at the moment, and the current crop of NFTs and the way that it's done is frankly wrong. And so these unauthenticated JSON blobs that you store in a token and send to each other, you know, interesting and exciting, and the monkeys and the little punk things that it's great to see. I think these are the V1s, and we really need to get to V2 NFT for serious artists to put their work up, and for what I'm talking about here is provenance. What I'm talking about is ownership. What I'm talking about is being able to prove cryptographically the ownership of these tokens and what they represent. And you know that currently isn't really how the NFTs work. So Minima has an NFT solution, being played with in the R&D. And these are the questions that we ask ourselves. So, you need to sign something. There needs to be a signature in there of a token ID, which is globally unique. So you cannot make a bit perfect replica of an NFT, which you can now do using net replicas, yeah, for any NFT on Ethereum. But that's because they're the V1s. I'm sure there will be, different schemes and different protocols that run the NFTs, which will fix these initial little issues. Um, but what I really love about NFTs is that they've just sort of come from nowhere. That nobody would have even thought about them. Nobody even knows what they were, and then from nowhere they sort of emerged as this force that is taking the internet by storm. So that they're a wonderful piece of technology in its infancy, with lots of problems at the moment, which I'm sure will be ironed out in the future. And Minima is trying to address those with strong cryptography and the benefit of hindsight as to what the problems were.
Yeah, I think NFTs have definitely contributed also to onboard a lot of retail people into crypto. Um,
Yeah,
that,
absolutely. Lots of people didn't know anything about crypto, but suddenly they're like, "Hey, I own this monkey." They're not interested in owning bitcoins, but they are interested in owning monkeys with cool hats. So, who'd have guessed that, frankly?
yeah, it has become the new status symbol.
Yeah.
Another question from Montreal on Discord is, other than general freedom, what are you most excited about in terms of potential opportunities for Minima or the Minima community after the mainnet launch?
Well, when I think of what is going to transpire if and when we get this right, it is not the case that I think, in our current systems today, I'm not allowed to send money to these people, and I'm not allowed to do this, and so what does freedom actually give me? I sort of look at the base layer. I go lower down to a lower level, and I think, we're going to scrub away that whole system. Governments are going to have to entice people to come and live in their countries. That the actual system for the free, once we have a system where value flows freely, once we have a system where information flows freely, I think the world that we're going to be looking at is going to be so different to the one that we are used to that we can't actually imagine what it's going to be. Yeah, like I said, nobody could have imagined these NFTs, and that's one of these great little things that just pop out. And I can't actually give you a representation of what I think the world will look like once we live in a space which allows us to do these things. Because everything once that base layer is changed, everything built on top of it will be different too. All the things that we think are important today and all the little niggles we have today may not even be a consideration in this new world. And so I guess when I think of freedom, yes, obviously I'm excited about freedom, but freedom is very raw. Freedom can be very, freedom is natural. It can be brutal. It can be, it can be cruel. It can be beautiful. It can be many things. And the world that we are trying to build here, um, is going to be very different to the one that we are used to. And watching that unfold is going to be very exciting.
Okay. And You also asked another question, and that's more about building Minima in the last few months. What's been the most challenging part of actually getting this done so far, and what do you worry about most for the next 6 months?
Good question. So I have, I obviously see Minima in a very specific way. There's no aspect of it that I don't really, that I don't understand. And so I know where the pressure points are. And so getting Minima to run on the phone was the first challenge. And I think we've done that. Yeah, we've managed to squeeze it down, data size, blah, blah, blah. The next challenge is going to be the efficiency of the protocol. And if I'm honest, I guess my big worry is that the speed of the growth of the network and the transactions per second that are fired across it is is measured against the speed of the optimization of the protocol. When we're running this on a chip, no problem. Yeah, when we've got this running on hardware, Minima is an incredibly parallel system, which means that you can run transactions in parallel. We don't actually have an order of transactions in a block. All the transactions in a Minima block occur simultaneously and atomically, which means that either they all go or they don't go. Yeah, or none of them go. So once we get this ability to, because parallelism is a very well understood and excellent way of speeding up processes. But having a process work in parallel is not something that is simple. The process itself needs to be designed in that way. You can't just take, Ethereum is not parallel. Yeah, in Ethereum, when you get a block, you have to process the transactions in order because the end of one transaction can affect the beginning of another. This is not the case on Minima. On Minima, all of the transactions in a block can be taken in all of them, and I can send each transaction off to a separate chip or a separate process, and they can each process them, and they either all return yes, they're valid, or one of them says no, this one's not valid, so they're not. So all of them are not valid. So yeah, I what I need to know is that we are going to be able to make the protocol fast enough, running on your phone to keep up with the speed of the growth of the network. And that is what I'm working on at the moment. Optimization, that sort of thing. Because the protocol itself is finished. Yeah, there's no more to add to it. And that is going to be the big challenge over the next 6 months.
Yeah, a lot of the recent protocols, they are competing in transaction per seconds, and obviously at the sacrifice of decentralization. Do you think that's even a sensible thing to do?
Um, no, I do not think it's a sensible thing to do. But what I will say is that it is a known fact that layer one does not scale. So these protocols that try to tell me how many transactions per second they can do on layer one is completely meaningless. That's not where the action is going to take place. You don't want to be running on layer one. Layer one is slow, it is expensive, it is clunky. Yeah, it doesn't scale. Whereas on layer two, when you're running on a well-designed layer two, like the Lightning Network, which works seamlessly on Minima, um, you can run a transaction instantly for free. So you don't want to wait for your transaction to have, 3, 4 confirmations. You want it to happen instantly. So actually, the goal is just to get off chain and to use, you know, Lightning. I have yet to see a piece of tech that works as well as hash time lock contracts. So, for those of you technical enough to know what I'm saying, these are the things that basically run the Lightning Network. These are the contracts that allow you to atomically swap one thing for another thing on layer two instantly. And once you have that, you can use that as a bridge. Yeah, you can use that as a bridge to any other chain that supports this. I see a lot of bridging tech out there, and it's always about federations, and it's always about like how many people have you got, or hardware HSM devices that decide whether or not the money has gone to the other chain or not. And I always think, why are you just doing this on layer two over HTLC? Yeah, it works perfectly, instantly, for free. We know it works. You can do it today. So, telling me that you can do 1,000 transactions per second is not, which none of them can do. But if what you really want is you want to say there is no limit to the number of transactions. As far as I'm concerned, scalability, like decentralization, is 0, 1. Can I do as many transactions as I want off chain instantly? On Lightning, you can, yeah. And so that's where you need to be aiming for, not the layer one stuff. The layer one stuff just needs to be to the limit of the capacity of the hardware of the devices running it. And since we are running it on phones, that is going to be less than what Sol does with its 400 millisecond block times running on its 10,000 pound computers. But as you've said, they've sacrificed decentralization. There's no way anybody can run a Sol, server. So I sort of think of it as a pretty useless metric, actually. Layer one, that is.
Yeah, it's true, and it has come as a cost, as we've all seen for Sol with the recent DDoS attacks. But since you already picked up on scalability and decentralization, what's your take on the decentralization, the blockchain trilemma, which is basically saying that you can't have all
Yeah,
three,
well,
decentralization?
yes, no, absolutely. And I did write a sort of little tweet storm the other day about it. And what I would say is that it's not actually a trilemma. It's actually a dilemma because there's only two things that matter. Because with regard to blockchains, you cannot have centralization and security because as soon as you have lost decentralization, you are no longer secure. Because when we refer to security of a blockchain, what we are actually saying is this blockchain is resistant to censorship attacks. And that can only happen through decentralization because as soon as you're centralized, it's easy to censor. It's easy to censor. And so when Vitalik was saying, well, look, you can either have the scalability, the security, or the decentralization, that's wrong because you cannot sacrifice the decentralization for security because those two things are the same. So the only thing that you can actually have is scalability and security stroke decentralization. So I don't think of it as a trilemma. It is a dilemma. Can we scale and can we remain decentralized? That's the goal. We have to come up with technology that remains decentralized, that doesn't have any centralizing forces or pressure on the system, and that can scale to the size that is required for us to do what it is we need to do on it. Uh, that's what I think.
Yeah, I think that's one of the very few who actually think it is not a trilemma. Um, So a lot of people ask when they start running Minima, and at the moment they obviously earn incentive cash tokens, and those will be turning into Minima coins at mainnet launch. But a lot of them wonder, like, what is their incentive to continue running their node after mainnet launch? What would you say?
Utility. You'll be using Minima. You'll be doing cool things on Minima. You'll be having your tokens and your NFTs and all the things that you currently do on all the other blockchains, just that you'll be doing it instantly and for free over layer two. So I mean, I know what you're saying. I know people who
Yeah.
have this Minima and they're gonna take it on the day that we give it to them, and they're gonna immediately go to Binance and sell it for whatever other coin they want to buy. I would strongly urge against doing that. Yeah. What the reason you're going to be running Minima is because A, it isn't going you're not even going to know that you're running it. It takes up less battery power than WhatsApp. And B, you hopefully you're going to find some use, in these blockchains. They're not just a scheme for making tokens that you can sell. This isn't an airdrop that it's like sell it as soon as you get it. What we're trying to do here is we're trying to incentivize a community large enough to bootstrap an economy that Minima is going to service. And if we don't give you the utility, if we don't give you anything that you feel is useful, then don't, then we have failed, frankly. But there is going to be reasons for you to have Minima installed aside from the incentive cash tokens that we're giving out at the moment to bootstrap the economy.
What would be the apps you are most excited about? Like, let's say we give you entire freedom to build whatever. What
Oh,
would that be?
um, well, I mean, at its core, Minima is a value transfer layer, and so at its core, the tokenization of different assets. Setting up Minima was an incredibly eye-opening and depressing affair because the hoops we had to jump through to be allowed to do things that you would have expected to be completely, of no issue at all, was ridiculous. We couldn't even get a bank account for 18 months. Yeah, because we had the word crypto on our website and the banks would say no. And it's like, well, that's not up to you. And then, getting investment, being able, like, imagine if you could start a company, create tokens that represented the shares in your company, sell those tokens on a DEX, the reason that shares were invented originally were so companies could raise capital. I used to be able to 100 years ago walk into the New York Stock Exchange and just sell shares in my company because I needed the money to do something, to have some endeavor achieved. And then I would pay those people back, and then I could go back and ask for more money. And if I didn't do what I said I was going to do, then I couldn't go back to the stock market, and I couldn't raise more capital. So there is an incentive for you to actually, pay up, for you to do what you say you're going to do. All of this is impossible currently.
Yeah.
Company 2.0, as I think of it, is an application where you would be able to set up a business, create tokens that represent shares, pay dividends to those tokens seamlessly without having to ask permission. The as soon as you have a barrier to entry, 99% of people go. Like, I remember back in the day when we used to do a website, and if at the beginning of it you said, look, can you just give us your email and then you can go in? We're not going to do anything, just give us your email. 99% of people wouldn't do it. Just a little tiny hurdle, just a small barrier to entry stops 99% of people. And that stops innovation, that stops entrepreneurship, that stops so much from occurring. And once you remove all of that, the tidal wave of innovation that is going to occur is going to make everybody stop and, hold their breath, frankly.
So basically, it's going to be a solution for people to tokenize their own companies.
Well, no, I'm just saying that's one of the things that you could do on the Minima network. Value
Yeah.
transfer. Max Chat excites me enormously. This idea that
Yeah.
I'll have a system of communication which is immune from the trappings of the current centralized systems, where I'll never have to worry about them turning it off because it's completely peer to peer. Where I'll never have to worry about Amazon showing me adverts for things that I was talking about in confidence with other people. So there are so many apps that are possible. Everything that we see out there, frankly. Um, but yeah, I'd like a system for starting a business and being an entrepreneur without having to worry about all the horrible things that we had to do to get Minima started.
Yeah, and you would think because it isn't that we just started with this whole crypto industry journey that banks would be more open by now, but it is still very common that they block you just because you've had the audacity to use Coinbase or
You can't
transfer
even
methods.
transfer money from Kraken to your HSBC account. Yeah, so that was my exchange of choice back in the day. I love the name, so and I've been
Yeah.
using it for many years. And now HSBC don't allow that, and I'm like, guys, what are you doing? You're forcing me to stop using you. You're actively destroying the monopoly that you have by just being ridiculous and and obstructive. And they could embrace this. This is what I don't understand about these banks, about these financial institutions. This should be their bread and butter. They should be all over this. They should be integrating this technology. People are still, people think there isn't going to be a use for banks. There is. Banks used to be a place you went for loans, and they would assess you, and then they would say, okay, I can give you this loan, and I think the risk of you not paying me is X, so I'm going to charge you 6%. But if you're somebody who always pays back their loans on time and it's never an issue, they'll do it for 1%. And if they don't, you'll go to another bank. So the idea that there won't be banks in the future is wrong. Yes, there will be banks in the future. That banks used to be a place that you could go and get a loan to do something if you didn't want to if you didn't want to start a company and raise capital in that fashion. Um, so so they could be doing this very differently. And I guess actually looking at it, it was obvious that they were going to be completely childish about this and just try to stop us all from doing what we want to do. But this is only going to backfire, frankly.
Yeah, and I think actually banks integrating blockchain and could also take us back more to the approach how it used to be because you were using your own reputation to basically get a loan. So,
Absolutely.
yeah. Okay. Last questions because we are nearing the 1 hour. So let's start. Yeah, finish with something positive. What are you most excited about for the next month on Minima?
Launching Maxima
Hmm.
and doing the new version and seeing what people think of our information transfer technology. So we sort of have the final lineup for Mainnet now, as in we have an application representing each of the applications that we would like to have when we launch Mainnet. And those applications will need to be polished and upgraded and made nice and optimized, etc., etc. But this is something we haven't shown our users yet. This is something we haven't given to the community yet, and it's a big part of the white paper. So we've got Minima running, and now we've got Maxima running, and I think the two of them together, value and information, is going to be hopefully, world changing, hopefully groundbreaking. And I hope the community think that is the case.
Yeah, I can't wait for the feedback they will have once we actually provide them with access to
Yes,
maximize
exactly.
people's work.
Me too.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you very much, Patty, and to everybody who joined us. If I hope we answered most of the pressing questions, and if you still have questions, feel free to drop them to us anytime. We're happy to help anybody understand Minima better. And if you want to discuss concepts with us directly, I'm excited to share that we're also going to host another community call next week on Tuesday. So watch out for a further announcement there, because you will be able to join us on stage and directly share your ideas with us. And yeah, thank you everybody for joining and have a great day. We're looking forward to seeing you soon again.
Thank you. Thanks very much, everyone. A pleasure to talk to you all as always.